Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have used this duvet that was part of a free bundle of bedding I got to make a Shirred Maxi dress with tie-up straps. I really like the pattern on this duvet and thought it would make a really nice dress. This project is beginner friendly and is a good way to practice some different sewing skills. It is also a good way to transform a duvet cover into something fashionable for summer. So let's get into it. First, I cut along all the seams of the duvet cover so I had two separate pieces of fabric. I started by making the top half of the dress. I needed to take my measurements so I knew how much fabric I needed. I measured around my chest. This measurement was 36 inches. I then decided how long I wanted the top half to be. I wanted mine to be 10 inches long, but I added an inch for seam allowance, so my measurement was 11 inches. I started by folding the fabric in half, right sides together. As the top is shirred, I needed to add a few inches of fabric to the width to allow for the fabric to shrink with the elastic. To work out how much fabric I needed, I took my chest measurement of 36 inches and divided this by 2 as my fabric is folded in half. This was 18 inches. I then added 5 inches to this to allow for the shirring. My measurement was 23 inches. Starting from the folded edge, I measured 23 inches across my fabric and marked this. Next, I measured 11 inches down from the top edge of the fabric. I then joined these points with a straight line and cut along the line I had just drawn. This piece will become the top half of my dress. With the wrong side of the fabric facing up, I hemmed the top and bottom edges. I used a double hem for this. I did this by folding the edge down 1/4 of an inch and then folding it over 1/4 of an inch again and pinning it in place. This hemming method is good to use as it hides the raw edge of the fabric inside the hem and will stop the fabric from fraying. I did this for both the top and bottom edges. Once everything was pinned in place, I sewed where I'd pinned. This is how it looked. Next, I needed to shirr the top half of the dress. To do this, I changed my bobbin thread to a shirring elastic. I also needed to change some settings on my sewing machine. I increased the tension on my sewing machine to a higher number and selected the longest straight stitch my sewing machine has. With the right side of my fabric facing up and using the sewing foot as a guide, I placed the fabric so the bottom of the hem lined up with the edge of my sewing foot. I then started shirring. By having the right side of the fabric facing up, the elastic will be on the inside of the top once sewn. This is how the first line looked. I then repeated this on the entire piece of fabric, making sure each line was evenly spaced. Again, I used my sewing foot as a guide for this. I also made sure to backstitch at the beginning and end of each line to hold the elastic thread in place. This is how the top looked once it was completely shirred. Next, I started working on the bottom piece of the dress. First, I took my measurements to work out how much fabric I needed. I measured around my hips. This measurement was 38 inches. I then decided how long I wanted my dress to be. I decided on 40 inches, but added an inch for seam allowance, so my measurement was 41 inches. Taking my hip measurement of 38, I divided this by 2 as my fabric was folded in half. This was 19 inches. I then times this by 1.5 to make sure I would have enough fabric to make the skirt piece. My new measurement was 28.5 inches. Using the other half of the duvet, I folded this in half, right sides together. Then, from the folded edge, I measured and marked a width of 28.5 inches along the fold. I then measured a length of 41 inches down from the top edge. I then joined these points with a straight line and cut along the line I had just drawn. This will become the bottom piece of my dress. I then needed to make the bottom piece more fitted at the waist. To do this, I sewed a straight stitch 1/4 inch away from the top edge, making sure I didn't backstitch at the beginning or end. Once sewn, I had these 2 long threads on each end of my fabric. When I pulled on the back thread, it began to gather the fabric. I did this until the fabric was gathered enough to fit my waist properly. I then tied the threads on each end to hold the gathering in place. Next, I needed to attach the top piece to the bottom piece. As the top piece was smaller than the bottom piece, I needed to stretch the top piece to fit the bottom piece. With the bottom edge of the top piece and the top edge of the bottom piece lined up, I began to pin the 2 pieces together, right sides together. I started at one end and stretched the top piece slightly as I pinned them together, so the ends of both pieces matched up. Once everything was pinned in place, I sewed where I'd pinned, making sure to stretch the top piece as I sewed. This is how it looked once it was sewn. I could now close the dress up. I folded this in half, right sides together, and pinned down the open edge. I then sewed where I'd pinned. On to making the straps. I measured out a piece of fabric that was 23 inches long and 3 inches wide, and cut this out. I then repeated this until I had 4 pieces of fabric. Taking one of these pieces, I folded it in half, right sides together, and pinned along the long edge. I then repeated this on the other 3 pieces. Once everything was pinned in place, I sewed along the long edge and also along one of the short ends. This was so each strap would have a neater finish. I then turned the straps inside out so they were now the right way round. This is how they looked. Next, I attached the straps. While trying the dress on, I decided where I wanted the straps to sit. Once I was happy with the placement, I marked each side of each strap on the inside of the dress. This would make it easier for me to sew the straps in the right place once the dress was off, as the fabric would shrink from the shirring. With the dress inside out and the front of the dress facing up, I took one strap and, making sure the non-finished end of the strap was inside the dress, I pinned the strap in place about an inch away from the top edge. I then repeated this with the second strap for the other side. I then sewed the straps in place. Then I attached the other two straps to the back of the dress, with the front of the dress still facing up and making sure the seam was sitting in the middle of the dress. I measured from the sides of the dress to the centre of the straps. This measurement was 2.5 inches. I turned the dress over so the back of the dress was now facing up. I measured 2.5 inches in from the side of the dress and placed the centre of my third strap at this measurement and pinned it in place, making sure it lined up with the strap on the front of the dress. I then repeated this for the fourth strap and sewed them in place. This is how they looked once they were sewn on. Finally, I needed to hem the bottom of the dress. Again, I used a double hem for this to give the dress a neater and more professional finish. I pinned this in place all the way around the bottom of the dress. I then sewed where I'd pinned. The dress was now complete and this is how it looked. I really liked how the dress looked and fitted. This dress was easy to make and will definitely be part of my summer wardrobe. As I had so much spare fabric from my duvet cover, I also made a matching hairband to go with my dress. I have made a video explaining how to make these hairbands, so I'll leave a link to that in the description below if you wanted to check that out. I thought they looked really nice together and having matching accessories really helps to tie an outfit together. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video.